I mean, I'd be happy that I had $3.9 to begin with.
This Week in E-Commerce, episode 132. Mal Chia back with you for another week with Alex. Alex, how are you?
I'm good, Mal. How you going?
I'm doing really well. Back in Australia, although I'm not back home. I don't know actually when I'm going to be able to record from the office.
Well, we miss your reliable background with all your accolades in the back.
Instead, just get a whole bunch of hotel rooms or stairwell.
Yeah. Like we're on tour with you.
Yeah. How was your Easter break, if you had a break at all?
I did. It was great. It went quickly. Went up to the river, Ramco, for anyone familiar with the Adelaide Riverland. Played some golf. Caught up on Netflix.
Lovely. Fantastic.
What about you?
Oh, look, I was coming back from Japan, where I had an amazing time. I gotta say, Japan, every time I go there, just amazes me. Although I'm not a big fan of Tokyo, I love Osaka. Osaka is a great cultural hub, especially we stayed in the Amerikamura district, which is America Town. And what I love about it there is that there's loads of vintage stores. And they're bringing in lots of secondhand goods from overseas, buying it in bulk. And you get a real sense for what is trending or where the trends are coming. And retro is well and truly back in when you go over there. The amount of like late 90s starter jackets and tracksuits is just like unreal. So I had a good time just like diving into them and buying some retro San Antonio Spurs NBA merchandise.
Love that. I definitely felt when I was there, there's that big kind of hip hop NBA influence in the retro.
Yeah. And I bought some Japanese streetwear as well. So things you can't find in Australia. So if you're a retail fest, which I know you will be, and anyone else listening, I will be planning to wear quite a bit of that gear just to stand out on stage a little bit.
Oh, I've got some fun Japanese streetwear. Maybe I'll pack that as well, and we can rock.
That'd be good. And you're doing a party over in Retail Fest on the first night.
We are, yes, at Pink Flamingo. We hosted it last year with a few partners. There was a long list actually, and we're doing it again this year. It's a really, really great event. We're also hosting volleyball one morning as well. So if anyone's interested that's going to Retail Fest, reach out. We can send you the event details.
Volleyball.
Yes, in the morning. So I'm not sure if I'll take the pink gift. I'm more of the pink stuff gal.
Yeah, I might take you up on the volleyball one. We'll see how I go. Normally, just go to the gym. Although last year was a total write-off. Did not make it to much at all in the morning.
What about yourselves? Are you hosting anything while you were there? I know you did something last year.
Yeah, we will be. So this year we will be doing the workshop on opening day. So opening day, we're doing a workshop with Shopify. So we're going to be talking about how to build 7 and 8 figure growth systems. So not just looking at paid ads, but looking at the whole marketing ecosystem as a whole. And we're partnering with Shopify this year to actually then present that actual website destination side of things. So it's not just about how do you actually create demand, how do you then convert that demand once you're on site as well. So Shopify have a great session lined up looking at the AI tools that they've been launching, but then also looking at how best to optimize your storefront as well. So that's going to be a really exciting one.
Yeah, awesome.
And in addition, doing a few other things, I'm speaking on a couple of different stages. Not entirely sure. They haven't sent me through my agenda yet. I'm sure I'm going to open up the app and realize that I'm on more things than I expected, which was what happened last year.
Yep. And you'll probably get pulled into a few last minute things as well.
Yeah. Had to do a last minute keynote last year with 12 hours notice from memory. Good times. Anyway, before we get too distracted with the Retail Fest talk, we have a very big episode with a lot of news, including the absolutely spectacular collapse of Allbirds. Sabo have gone to war with some retailers, and also a quick update on what's going on in the US market as well. But to kick things off, our first quickie is one which, no surprises, is that AusPost have acquired Rendr. Now, Rendr, R-E-N-D-R, same-day delivery platform. They've been around for a couple of years. They're a tech company using a lot of algorithms to be able to match you with the best courier to help get the parcel to you as quickly and as cheaply as possible. It's a great technology, particularly for same-day delivery. And AusPost have gone out and bought them now, which makes a hell of a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's a great partnership. And it's one of those things at hindsight, like, earlier.
Yeah, look, and it's something which I think it's definitely a real defensive move in terms of like how do they respond to obviously the Amazon threat. We've talked about this so much. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the new fulfillment center they're building in Queensland to be able to facilitate same-day delivery. This is more of the same in terms of like how do we make sure that anyone who is using AusPost does have that. But I think also in terms of AusPost as well, being able to continue to level up their technical capability, because they've always seemed a little bit one step behind throughout all this. So this might be a way to be able to fast track that.
Yeah, and they seem to be doing, from what we've reported, like more acquisitions in their own investment and their own tech capabilities. So maybe that speaks to your point about being on the back foot a bit.
Yeah. Look, if you can't build it, buy it. That's the Facebook methodology.
Exactly.
All right. Our second quickie is Click Frenzy and Power Retail have gone into administration. So the parent company Global Marketplace, which is majority owned by e-commerce pioneer Grant Arnott, have entered administration and have appointed receivers. So this happened literally. I saw this right after we recorded last week, and they've said that this is a result of the revenue hit from the US-Iran conflict. Your thoughts?
Well, I think I said this, you sent it to me right after last week. I think it's sad news, more so on the power retail, those sites that to look at what's going on, like their emails. I haven't personally been influenced by Click Frenzy over the last few years. I'm not surprised on that front, particularly where it would amalgamate with Afterpay Day as well. So yeah, a bit of mixed emotions. What about you now?
I think there's the diffusion of innovation curve, where you go through like the innovators, the early majority, the early adopters, early majority, laggards, etc. I think in terms of what they created with Click Frenzy, which was genuinely pioneering at the time, it's done its dash. That whole thing about, building people up towards, 124, 48-hour hype moment to go and buy. We've been there, done that, and other people are now doing it better. So, and I think you can't have a business which is based on that. There was also the other one, which was focused very much on Green Friday, which is focused on the same, but focused on sustainability. Similar thing as well. Didn't really have legs because I think people aren't really interested in that anymore. And I think the saleable asset which they're trying to flog off at the moment, which is the database. I would also say it's an incredibly old database as well, and an incredibly fatigued database too. So I'm not really sure how much value that actually had. And for the power retail side, I think from diversity of news, yes, it's a bit of a sad one where there's not enough going to be, there's a loss in retail media, which is now out there. And I say retail media is in media reporting about the retail, not about selling retail media. That is going to be sad. But also at the end of the day, we've also got other great options like Inside Retail who do an incredible job, Rag Trader on the fashion side, also kind of already covering that slack already.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say Inside Retail did the best job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, we're both big fans of their work. And finally, our last quickie is junior pay rates in retail are about to be abolished. So the Fair Work Commission has ruled that retail workers 18 and over must be paid the full adult rate, which abolishes the whole junior pay rates as well. So this change is going to be phased in through to 2030 and is expected to affect 500,000 workers across retail, fast food, pharmacy, with pay rises of up to 42% for all affected workers. So junior rates for 17 and under still remain in place, but for those 18 and over, they're now going to be paid as full adults, which is great, I think, from a worker perspective.
I think so, and I think that appeal for people to work in retail as well, particularly those young adults, is great. My instant thought went to, okay, how are we going to start to see that shift as a consumer in prices to offset the increase in pay?
Yeah, and that's something which the Australian Retail Council has alluded to, that they've said it's going to add more cost pressures to small retailers, which I don't disagree with. But I think if you look at the more long-term view of it, it also does mean that you're going to have more senior people who will continue to work in your business. So you have that ability to actually have people who stay there for longer, maintain that corporate knowledge, rather than keep bringing in younger kids to kind of fill in that junior pay gap. So overall, I think that could lead to a better outcome for retailers, but also customers as well, who are going to be served by more older, knowledgeable workers who can now generally start to see retail as a career path. I know when I was younger, it was a career path, but over the years, it's been kind of eroded where it was no longer attractive to stay in retail from your late teens through to adulthood. It's become something you do through a period, and then you get paid shit, and then you leave.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when it comes to having consistent workers in a store as well, the value of that cannot be understated. That, in my mind, drives true loyalty for brick and mortar stores.
All right, we're going to move into our deep dives now. And the big one for the last week is, Alex, how would you feel if you lost $3.9 billion?
I mean, I'd be happy that I had $3.9 billion to begin with. But yeah, obviously, it's a devastating news for Allbirds.
Yeah, look, devastating, but also not unexpected. So they sold all their IP and assets to American Exchange Group for $39 million after a trading high of $4.1 billion when they launched on the NASDAQ back in 2021. So this is a 99% wipeout. And it's just, the writing has been on the wall for a long time. This is a company which has not been profitable for many, many years, but was also really held up as being one of the poster childs for D2C back when back in like the late 2010s when they first launched with their merino wool sneakers. It really made quite a wave. I remember when I was working in tech, it was all the footwear everyone in tech wanted to be wearing, and that's all they wore. But now, over the last few years, no one would be caught dead wearing Allbirds anymore. So what do you think about this? Like, where do you think they went wrong?
Look, I remember, I personally haven't worn, bought, tried Allbirds, but to your point, when they first were beginning and being that post child of D2C, there was so much emphasis in R&D for them. Whereas now I think we've probably seen other players kind of copy that and keep up with the innovation, so they're losing that edge.
Yeah, I think the fact that they've tried to innovate within the woolen sneakers, coming up with sustainable running shoes and things like that, they've never been able to actually have something which is able to match the performance of those other categories they've tried to expand into. So really, even now, like from what I understand, their top seller is still the original woolen sneaker which they have, because the performance shoes do not match the performance of a proper sneaker, right? And then when they've tried to continue to innovate, within the sustainability angle, it's also bloody hard, because as we've seen over the last few years, is that people are generally not willing to pay a premium for sustainability unless you've also got the performance. And when you don't have the performance and you are competing solely on sustainability, it's really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And that status symbol of sustainability, but that cool factor, they really come hand in hand, don't they?
Yeah. I think the other problem with Allbirds as well is probably actually going public. The fact that they went public with such a ginormous valuation meant that they had a lot of investors and a lot of shareholders who demanded growth, who were expecting growth, and have now seen their investment get wiped out 99%, right? Yeah, and part of that is also that overhyped bubble, which, well, not really bubble, that overhyped cycle which we went through in D2C, where a lot of these D2C brands commanded massive valuations but just weren't able to sustain it. So I think people saw that initial growth, jumped on it, and they just tried to grow and grow and grow rather than actually figuring out what a sustainable business model actually is for them. Because ultimately they're selling a very expensive sneaker, which is about like 120 to 160 USD, which no one really wants.
Yeah, look, we've seen D2C brands, leading D2C brands in the last couple of years really move to make sure they have that physical presence. So omni-channel was obviously something that everyone spoke about a couple of years ago, and we're really seeing D2C move across to have that accessibility, particularly for a product. Sorry, Mal. So say particularly for a product like this, where being able to try it on, being able to see it, being able to feel it does add to that value.
Yeah, and I think, but on that point around the stores, though, Allbirds did open up a lot of stores. They actually open up stores
Okay.
like crazy around the US. I think the
Yeah.
US, New Zealand, where they're from, and some other markets as well. But they've now closed all of those as well. So they try to expand into a lot of
Mm.
different areas. I think when you're trying to expand off a really poor value proposition in the first place, you can't do that. Whereas you see some of the other brands who are doing well, like Princess Polly, for instance, who have a really clear value proposition and are able to expand quite successfully as well. Similarly with Culture Kings in the US, where it's a really clear value prop. People understand why. They already desire the product. Whereas Allbirds are taking a product which people have stopped desiring and are trying to expand that. And a similar thing is happening right now with Pop Mart as well, where year on year, their sales have declined by 60%. And yet they are on this huge expansion strategy at the moment. Yeah, we've talked about this before, where they're opening up a lot of flagship stores in a lot of big markets around the world. I went past a few in Osaka, went past one in Tokyo, the one which they've just opened here in World Square in Sydney. It's a huge store, but there's no one in it. So they've done all this at the wrong end of the curve.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I wonder if this applies a little bit to the toy mart as well. But I think with Allbirds, having that single category is tough at the end of the day, not being able to truly cross-sell and completely outfit like those other brands that you just mentioned before as well.
Yeah, look, but I think you can if you've got the right product. We've talked about Levi's before, and I think Levi's have the right product, and they are great in a product which people will always come back to and buy. They own denim, like they are probably the most well-known brand in denim. So you can do that, but I think in their case, they're sneakers, which are good sneakers, I guess, and maybe they're comfortable. I've got some friends who've had Allbirds before, like I said, but it wasn't something which outside of those people who wanted that novelty, it never really caught on. Like I looked at the website probably at least half a dozen times, thinking, oh yeah, maybe. Nothing ever was compelling enough to tip me over the line. And I own a lot of sneakers.
You're probably their target market now.
Well, it turns out not really. All right, our second deep dive is that Sabo Skirt has filed in Queensland against 16 retailers for allegedly copying 36 patterns, prints, or sketches. Now, the named defendants in this have been Kmart and Shein, Billy J, who faced 11 allegations of copying, and 13 others who have not been named. Now, this is a big one, actually, I think, because you don't see this very often where people are willing to take someone to court, because it's always been considered as something which isn't really defensible, a design or a pattern. But they have. And it turns out that Sabo, back in 2024, actually took Shein to court. And while there was a settlement which said that Shein would stop making this product, it seems that they kept doing it anyway.
Ah, that's interesting context. I didn't know that about Shein with them. This story blew up in my opinion. I saw there were multiple news outlets reporting on it. I've seen it on a few other kind of podcasts as well. I think that we're all pretty pleased to see somebody fighting back against some of these players where we know there is that kind of dupe culture, but then I don't know, we've seen it with other beauty brands specifically, and it doesn't seem to land. So, what's your take? Where do you think it's going to go?
Look, I think copyright law has always been an interesting one in Australia, because Australia, and I think globally as well, is that you can't protect clothing because clothing exists in an area which isn't really considered art. Whereas if you are creating like a character for a video game, or you come up with an IP for a movie or a novel, you can't copy that. You can't copy that because that's protected by copyright law. So this is an interesting one, whether this is now going to force us to kind of relook at what copyright law is. Because if we don't, this is going to continue happening more and more, and it already is. There's brands who I work with before who release a product, and within the matter of months, they've got copycat products, which are much poorer imitations. But for a customer debating between a $90 product and a $9 product, and they don't really care about the quality, they'll go with the $9 one, which takes away sales. So you are hurting the creators. You are hurting the people who are innovating in this space. I guess my biggest surprising one here is looking at a Australian retailer like Kmart, who are literally stealing from their own countrymen, like Shein, the Temus of the world. You kind of expect that. Their whole business model is based on that. But to see an Australian company like Kmart, yes, they are Wes Farmers, so technically they're a South African company. I hope I got that one right. Doing this in their own backyard with another Australian retailer, I think it feels un-Australian.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a tough one because we know where Zara came from, so there's this deep roots in this just being accepted. And I thought as well, went through given all the news about this, that it really propelled Sabo um, as a leader in this space. So if you want to be ahead of the trends, that's who to shop with, and that can help justify that more premium price point.
And you're right. I think it goes back to the brand. Like if you can then set up your brand as being the influencer, the ones who are pioneering creating the trends, then yeah, absolutely. But that's a harder one to do as well. And that's something which a lot of brands can't really do as well. But as we've always talked about, brand equity is really the only moat in this world where things can be copied and duped so easily.
Exactly.
Yeah, we see that in fragrances. We see that in a lot of different categories. Look, I hope Sabo win. It's going to be really expensive because some of these companies
Mm.
have extremely deep pockets. And Shein, also on the sheer fact that they settled and they continue to do it anyway, shows that they just don't give two Fs about any of this.
Well, yeah, and does that settlement or penalty, you know, make a dent in their pocket? It probably doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a lot of the fines which we see in tech, right? Where they're so minuscule, like a couple of $100 million. It's like, you know what, it's pocket change to a lot of them. Like it won't actually deter anything until the penalty is the deterrent. And I think until that happens, with how big some of these companies are, we really need to really look at what sort of penalties we're actually handing out to stop people from doing some of this, like driving with a mobile phone, right? Like people used to drive with mobile phones all the time, but now knowing that it's going to be like $1,000 plus per offense, potentially losing your license, people will stop doing that. So we need to look at
Mm.
proportionally what's actually going to stop some of these companies from doing this.
Yeah, and I think all of these conversations and the awareness around this should help, whether that's in this case or just continuing to push this conversation along.
Yeah, yeah. And I think so. A real watch out though is that if this is successful, it does then open the doors to then being able to go and protect your designs as well, which is something which brands have never been able to do. So there is that silver lining that if they are successful in doing this and arguing the fact that clothing is IP, is design IP, it does mean that you're going to be able to do that. And if you can do that, then hopefully this does start deterring people. And it means that, there's an opportunity then to be able to protect your designs, to protect, to work with your manufacturers and make sure that there's real clear clauses in place so that they can't sell that same design to someone else.
Um,
All right. And our final deep dive is in the US, things are just getting more and more expensive. Now, the big one, which really perked my ears this week, is that Amazon have announced a 3.5% increase in fuel and logistics charges on all their FBA fulfillment. So this kicks in next week from the 17th of April in US and Canada. And I have no doubt that it's going to make its way down here as well. And they're like, like Power Retail and Click Frenzy blaming the Middle East conflict for this and saying because of the increasing cost of fuel, they're going to have to increase their fees and surcharges. But interesting thing is that they haven't announced if they're going to take it off.
yes, and whether they hope or forget about it and then won't ever be taken off.
Well, I don't think they'll ever forget about it because this is something that just stays on forever. That's kind of what they do. Uber, for instance, they've got a safe rides fee, which they introduced in New York to cover some of the additional charges. Which the government there was levying on them. So they just passed that on, and they've never taken it off. And same with Australia as well. That's happened with many other things. The emergency services levy, from about 20 years ago, which was put on, but that's never been removed. Even though the bushfires were long gone, and we assumed it would be removed, we still pay that every year. These things tend to be a tax because there's no incentive for them to take it off unless another player is in the market. And as we've talked about before with Amazon, they don't really have any competition.
Yeah, they've got a pretty strong moat.
Yeah, so I think with all of this, you're going to see increasing pressures on sellers from the merchants, in these markets who rely on FBA, who are just essentially being taxed more, right? And then with the margin pressures they're already facing, particularly when you stack that on the fact that in the US now, and this is one which Justin Irvine and I were debating, is that there's currently a loophole in terms of imports, where imports you can pay the tax on the country where it was first declared other than where you then ended up buying it from. So if you buy it from, let's say, China, but then it doesn't get declared to, let's say, Vietnam, you would pay the tariff on being imported from Vietnam. So they're now looking in the US to be able to close that loophole as well to make sure that you actually get the tariff on the country where it was manufactured.
Yeah, right. Okay. So they're closing the loop.
They are closing the loophole. Well, there's talk about closing the loophole on this, but it's been a way which a lot of the big retailers, particularly like the Walmarts of the world, have been able to evade paying the full amount of the tariffs and thus not having to pass on as much to the consumer. But if this changes, then they're going to have to pass on the full amount of the tariff or a higher tariff onto the consumer, which again makes things more expensive. So things in the US are getting more and more expensive. Where we're definitely, if they're not in there already, they're definitely going towards a recession.
Well, it depends on what side of the algorithm you're on, in terms of the state of the US economy at the moment. I've been seeing scary stories. It can get scary if you end up on the wrong side of TikTok. Yeah, but this all obviously has an impact, and it's taking money out of the pockets of retailers and sellers at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Australian retailers as well who do sell into the US through Amazon, they're going to be feeling this too. Obviously, if
Yeah.
they're using those services, and again, it just puts more and more margin pressure. So even though we're not selling, even though you may not be a US company, if you are selling to the US, you're going to see demand start to dry up there as well. Potentially, but also your profits decrease too. So it just puts so much additional pressure with everything which is going on. And to me, it's just like they're just looking for more ways to be able to, since they cut taxes for other people, well, they need to be able to get it from somewhere else. So why not retailers? And then ultimately the customer as well. So it's going to get really interesting there, as we know, all around the world. So I think it's going to be with everything which happening, where we've seen Allbirds this week, we've seen Sabo sort of pushing back. We've seen this increased pressure on the US market as well. It's again shaping up to be some very shaky times ahead.
At this point, obviously it's all new, but I would hope that the retail community is used to this some type of adversity. So it's just about adaptability at this point. It's just tough when every week's different to know how to adapt, right?
Yeah, well, I think you can't plan as a business without predictability. You need to kind of have some idea about what can happen. But I think it's also looking at those opportunities as well and saying, well, what does this open up? Is there something which we haven't been looking at? I know that a lot of people looked at COVID, and I think there's a number of businesses who I've looked at and spoken to in the past who panicked when COVID happened and shut down all operations. And as a result, were slow when things started to pick up again and the spending boom happened. Whereas others looked at it and went, okay, well, how can I actually pivot my business to take advantage of this moment? And I think we've always need to look at what that silver lining is, either through looking at opportunities to streamline what you're doing or to expand into other markets. Because I think cross-border is still a really huge opportunity, and whether we're looking in the right markets as well. And there's a conversation which I had in ETAL Asia a couple of weeks ago, where Asia is right there. Asia is ginormous, and we think about Asia as being poor countries, but if you look at some of these countries, they actually spend quite a bit, and they're used to paying high prices as well. I've got friends in Brazil, and they pay like comparable Australian prices, and they have no problems importing and buying from other countries over there because they know they can't get the same quality of goods there, and they're willing to spend a higher percentage of their income on those products. So thinking about where can you actually expand into if the US starts to soften, if Australia starts to soften, you always need to be looking at where that silver lining is for you.
Yeah. Look, I think that's really good advice.
All right. On that note, that's all we've got this week. It's been super interesting, as it usually is. We're super pumped to be bringing this to you. If you did find this useful, please share it with someone who's listening. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think. And we're still hoping to record that live episode at Retail Fest. So, Dylan, if you're listening, I will be reaching out to you for that. But in the meantime, keep innovating, keep growing, and keep selling. And we'll see you back next week.
See you next week.